Welcome into the LSU Sports Insider Podcast. Today is Monday, November 11th. Zach Ewing here with a couple of our advocate writers, Reed Darcey and Scott Rabalais. We are going to react today to the LSU-Alabama game. We've had 48 hours to think about it. You've had 48 hours to cool off. Maybe some perspective will help, guys. First of all, I want to say Happy Veterans Day to all the veterans out there. We appreciate you every day, but especially taking the time to say that today. And guys, this LSU-Alabama game, look, I don't know that there's a more appropriate word for it, and I know it's been said before, but there's no improving on the word embarrassing for this. I mean, it was a great opportunity for LSU, and losing is one thing. Losing the way they did is another.
You can say embarrassing, you can say humiliating. I think you could also say disappointing. You know, it felt pregame that, you know, this could be a really, classic Death Valley environment, right? And it felt like that at the start. It felt like that in the first quarter. It was super loud. But then once the rain started and the score went up, it turned into one of those miserable, depressing kind of nights in Tiger Stadium. So, yeah, embarrassing, humiliating. It sort of felt, I guess defensively, we'll get into this, but it sort of felt like they were just helpless, the feeling that you felt all through last year, So it was just an embarrassing performance. Nothing went right. I can't think of one thing that did go right. And now LSU is not going to make the playoffs because of it. So that's where things stand right
now. Whatever we say or write about LSU and how they did in this game, it's probably pales in comparison to what LSU fans are saying and feeling right now. So much was at stake in this game. As Reed said, the atmosphere just going into it was just great all day long on campus, and it was just amazing. And it just turned into the biggest egg-laying experience that you could have. And you can kind of dismiss a loss like that. They had a loss like this to Tennessee in Brian Kelly's first year. But in year three, you should be farther along than this. You should be competitive with an Alabama team that, look, it's not the 2020 Alabama team that won the national title. It's not the 2011 Alabama team that beat LSU in the rematch for the national championship game. It's a very good team, but it's not one of their all-time great teams. And they just wiped the field with LSU, and it leaves you wondering where this team and where this program goes from here.
Absolutely. Today's show is brought to you by Waste Pro. Tiger fans, if you're planning a tailgate or event, keep your guests comfortable with portable toilets from Waste Pro. Call 225-744-6400 and mention LSU Sports Insider for a special offer. We're going to take a quick break, and then when we come back, we're going to react to this LSU-Alabama game. I think starting first, looking at the big picture, guys, and maybe where LSU's program is, and then we'll dive into some of the specific reasons the Tigers need to fix, not just for the next 3 games, but going forward to compete with the Alabamas of the world. So that's going to be our show for today, and we will get started right after this break.
Experience the convenience and cleanliness that Waste Pro brings to Mardi Gras, LSU tailgates, and festivals with our top-notch portable toilet services. Perfect for large crowds and community events. Join the countless satisfied families and organizers who trust Waste Pro to keep their gatherings spotless and sanitary. Discover more about our services and make your next event a success at wasteprousa.com.
There's no better place to parlay than Caesars Sportsbook. Parlay Builder gives you all the game day action from all across the league. Multiple games, legs, and props, all in one spot. It's so quick and easy, you can keep your focus on the games and your nachos. Or if you're focusing on one game, remember, you can place your same game parlays live during the action. Caesars Sportsbook, the only sportsbook app with Caesars rewards.
You know how far I've gone, now I'm home again. I'm feeling more alive these days than I've ever been.
At the Baton Rouge Clinic, our sole focus is to provide exceptional health care for your entire family so that you can get back to doing what you love most. We are caring for generations.
You gave me love, you gave me love.
Welcome back to the LSU Sports Insider Podcast. All right, guys, it's time to rip off this Band-Aid all the way, I suppose. Rab, you mentioned it. The atmosphere was great on campus. We've got some videos up on our YouTube channel. Subscribe to the channel, by the way. You can see all those videos of what college game day was like, what campus was like. It was just had the buzz of a really big game. And LSU, there are a few places that do big games better than LSU. And that lasted all the way through the rain, everything. That lasted all the way up until about 5 minutes into the game, when it just was apparent that LSU was just not ready for that. I mean, bad games happen. Look, like Texas lost a game to Georgia that they weren't especially competitive in this year. They happened to even really, really good teams. But this was like, obviously LSU planned for this game. They practiced 2 weeks for this game, but that just didn't show itself on the field.
No, it looked like a lack of preparation, a lack of focus. You could certainly say a lack of talent in some areas. And it's just, I go back to the Texas A&M game. They're up 17-7 midway through the third quarter, controlling the game. You're dominating Texas A&M. Texas A&M had one touchdown drive, but they couldn't really do anything. And then they put in Marcel Reed, and they touchdown, field goal, kneel on the ball. And then Alabama comes out, touchdown on their first two drives, with Jalen Milroe just running right up the middle for a 39-yard touchdown run to start the game. LSU got a field goal, but it was you're not keeping up at that point. So it's just like the whole. It's really it's really mystifying. It seems like the confidence, the swagger, the mojo has been sucked out of this team that was building and building and building during the 6-game winning streak that they had, including some wins over some very good teams, Ole Miss and South Carolina included, and a nice win at Arkansas. And it's just all evaporated. And I think that's the big question mark. Can they go to Florida and win? Are they the better team on paper? Sure, definitely. But are they the better team on paper than the last three teams they play, including Vanderbilt and Oklahoma? Yes, but where's that confidence? Where's that playmaking ability that we saw during the 6-game winning streak after they lost a competitive game to USC, obviously in the opener? And I don't know. I'm questioning how quickly they get that back, because I think they've certainly regressed in some areas.
Reed, it's again. I think if you look at the big picture, if LSU wins its last 3 games and finishes 9-3, I think we sat here 3 months ago and we pretty much all to a man picked 9-3. Maybe there was a 10-2 mixed in.
I was 10-2.
Yeah, you were 10. Yeah, but I mean 9-3 was certainly reasonable, well within the realm of possibility. No one was going to say 9-3 was a terrible season. Maybe it's the way that it happened, the fact that they,
I think so.
In back-to-back games now, all those dreams, you were in the top 10, you were favored to make the playoff, all those things, and now they've just come crashing down within the span of 2 games. Maybe that's what it is, but man, it just feels like the air got let out of the balloon fast.
I think it felt like that before the season. You're right. This felt like a 9-3 team. It felt like a 9-3 season. That if things break right, maybe you get to 10-2 and you can sneak into the playoff. But I think just the way the season played out, LSU had 2 really big chances to turn its season around, and it was against Texas A&M and it was against Alabama. And if you win one of those games, maybe you're like right in the thick of the playoff race. And those games for LSU, both of them were pretty winnable. I know Texas A&M is having a really good season, but LSU went on the road and they went up 17-7 right against them at halftime, and then things fell apart. So if you look at the last 6 quarters of football that LSU has played, it all started once Garrett Nussmeier threw that interception in A&M territory, and then Marcel Reed came in and A&M took over the game. So starting there, this season really fell apart, and it happened quickly. And I think that's what LSU fans are having trouble dealing with. Like at halftime of the A&M game, they were feeling great. They're feeling good about their chances of really turning this into a memorable season. But then it just all fell apart so quickly, and then it just spiraled down from there. The last 6 quarters of football, LSU. If you think about it, from the second half of the A&M game to like the first series of the fourth quarter of the Alabama game, 12 defensive series. The defense allowed 9 touchdowns, and 7 of those touchdowns were quarterback runs. Pretty hard to believe. It's a lot, and I think that sort of number sort of captures exactly how this all fell apart so quickly. They couldn't stop a running quarterback.
They've been outscored 73-19, I think, in the last 6 quarters, or last 5.5 quarters, really. And that includes a cosmetic, doesn't matter a bit, touchdown that Nussmeier threw to
11
Lacey.
seconds
11 seconds left in this game. So, just not just losing, not just, oh, man, you lost 2 hard games. They've gotten pounded in these last game and a half. And it's, like I said, mystifying is wondering why. I don't think it's a great team. I think any of us thought this was a great LSU team. That's really going to challenge for the national championship or the SEC championship. But but they were showing a lot of signs of progress, and it's just all dissipated.
In big picture, like I'm thinking about the investment in this program, right? Sure. Over the last 3 years, you bring in Brian Kelly, $100 million coach, right? And then you give him a mulligan with his coaching staff. You let him overhaul the defensive staff. That costs money as well. That required an investment, right? You essentially allowed him to piece together one of the best defensive staffs that money can buy, essentially, to get Blake Baker from Missouri and to get Bo Davis from Texas. You had to pry these guys away and get them back onto your staff, and that costs money. And so that's an investment, right, in your program. And what are the returns that LSU has seen on that investment so far? It's what you saw on the field Saturday against Alabama. It's not good. So right now you're just not getting that return on your investment. It doesn't mean it's never going to happen, but I think it's taking a little bit longer than LSU fans hoped or expected it to.
That's something I said to Zach on the postgame show. I think for the very first time, LSU fans, just observers of the program, can really question: are you getting your money's worth with all that you've spent? And you made a great point. And I think right now the answer is no. I mean, it's not. They're not abjectly terrible. You have to look at the whole balance of the season, and they're still 6-3. Look, Florida State started in the top 10, and they're 1-9. You know, that's objectively terrible. LSU's not terrible, but it's not as good as it could be or probably should be at this point in the progression of a program that's in its third year under Brian Kelly.
And it's not like the 2 years post 2019 where they're finishing around 500. It's like that. The thing, Zach, you mentioned on the postgame show, that how close is this LSU team from being 4-5? They're a couple plays away. Things break differently against South Carolina and Ole Miss. The season could feel and look a whole lot different. That we could play that game all we want. I try not to look back at that and do kind of stuff like that. But the margins are thin. LSU is not this dominant team that's going to go out and win comfortably. Like, they're going to be a few plays away from having their season either be really good and go into the playoff or not so good. And you're looking on the outside, and that's where LSU is as a program right now. I think LSU fans have to decide if that's acceptable or not.
Yeah, I mean, they're also, you could look at the flip side and say they're one play away against USC from being 7-2 and still holding on to some playoff hopes. It does go both ways. But ultimately, something sticks out to me. Brian Kelly last year said, boy, if we just had there's some comment about if the defense was better, we could be a national championship contender. And everybody understood you were losing Jaden Daniels. You're likely to take a step back on offense. And the defense has been better. But these last 6 quarters that you're talking about, Reed, are like, this is like the opposite. This is what last year's team would have looked like without Jaden Daniels, I think. Is more, I mean, the defense has just been shredded. And it had been much better before that. I mean, the Arkansas game, I think that's where it is. The Arkansas game in the first half of the Texas A&M game, it looked like, and even going back to Ole Miss, that defense had turned a corner.
Yep.
They were at least playing to an SEC average, and the offense was still humming. And you were seeing this, and instead it's kind of gone the other way. So we'll talk in a minute about how LSU can get back to competing with the big boys and what that looks like. I did want to bring one more thing up, Rab, and you were talking about your column that you're writing today and how you'll go about that. And there's an aspect here that we hadn't mentioned. I don't know how much this had to do with anything. They bring in this live tiger for the game at the behest of Governor Landry. And I have to say, and you guys disagree with me if you think differently, but it seemed to me like the people at LSU almost didn't even really want to do it themselves. They brought the tiger out in the corner of the stadium. They didn't parade him around like they used to. There was sort of this half-baked idea of, oh, this is part of the 100th year of Tiger Stadium anniversary, and this kind of awkward scoreboard tribute that said, oh, this is about Mike the Tiger, even though this isn't Mike the Tiger. And then here's this tiger, and even the applause was sort of like, oh, cool, a tiger. And there was a lot of blowback. I mean, the whole thing just seemed like a giant distraction. I don't know if it actually affected LSU on the field. I wouldn't think so. I wouldn't hope so. But the whole thing just didn't taste right.
Yeah, I don't know if it was a distraction to the team, but it certainly seemed to augur the whole disappointment of the night and everything. Look, it was a bad idea. You want to talk about the whole Tiger situation a little bit, or just the how?
Sure. I mean, you go where you want to go.
I've been going to LSU games since the late 1970s, and I remember probably the early 70s. But I remember I used to sit down close to the field. My mom's cousin had season tickets by the north goal line, And I remember when the tiger would come by with the cheerleaders on top of the cage, and it was thrilling. And I guess there's a tiny part of me that's nostalgic for that, because that was part of my childhood and everything. But that time has passed. It's like you used to be able to smoke in Tiger Stadium too, but you can't do that anymore either. Things change, and people realize this is not for the best. And they dragged this poor tiger in there, and it was just, as you said, it was very anticlimactic. And it was he was only there for like 7 minutes. He didn't go around the field. They just sat in the southwest corner of the end zone, and they took him off. And hopefully it was a bad idea. But almost as bad to me is that there was no pushback from the LSU administration, from President Tate, from Athletic Director Scott Woodward. The only person who has made a comment to this point, as we're sitting here Monday morning recording this, is Brian Kelly. When Koki Riley, our reporter, asked him at the Thursday press conference, your thoughts about the Tiger, and of course he said, "What do you say?"
He said, "I'm a huge Tiger fan.
I'm a huge Tiger fan, and go Tiger." And they didn't want him to answer that question. We were like, "Look, we got to ask him a question," and that wasn't. Of all you want to say about Brian Kelly and this week and everything, that wasn't really fair to him to have to be the only person who has answered a question about this. And why? Because everyone at the administration is afraid of the governor being vindictive if they put their foot down and say, no, we're not going to do this. Yeah, he had to kind of back off on the whole thing of having the team out there for the national anthem. That was a whole cause celeb earlier this year, right, in the wake of the women's basketball team not being on the court for the national anthem at the NCAA tournament. And but it's like he insisted on this because I'm going to make it happen because I'm the governor. And I don't want to get off on a big political tangent, but no, I don't think it was popular. I don't think anybody wanted it. I think even people who are staunch fans of and supporters of Governor Landry didn't think this was a good idea. And I hope it never, ever happens again.
You hear the phrase "stick to sports" sometimes from politicians when athletes try to put themselves in politics. Maybe stick to politics.
Stick to politics. It works both ways. Yes.
I just don't understand the point of it. I guess more than anything.
Zach, it did feel kind of weird. Like I'm from Louisiana. I went to LSU. Like I know, Rab, you can speak to this. How people just revere Mike, right? How big of a part of this culture of this town, of this city, of this state is Mike, right? He's a tradition. He connects us to our older generations. Mike's been here for
90 years,
almost a century.
And the habitat is legitimately cool and well done.
It is. It's a huge part of this state's culture. So it just felt weird, in my opinion. It felt weird to just bring a random tiger in from Florida, and just be like, all right, to honor Mike, here's another tiger that has nothing to do with any of this here. It's just it all felt kind of odd, and I think what might be the oddest part is how nobody from LSU is basically talking about it. We tried to, ask questions. We tried to get, a plan, some kind of details of how this all came together, or what the plans were for it. And nobody from LSU on either the athletic side or the university side would answer any questions about it. So that's the most puzzling part to me. I don't know why that they did or they didn't. You can speculate on it, Rab, but I don't know why they did or didn't.
We couldn't even find out before the game when the tiger was coming out, so that we could be prepared for photos and even where to stand and where to look and all that. I mean, it was a very half-baked thing, and it came off that way, I thought. So that's kind of an aside. Let's move on to this, and maybe this is a rough transition, but LSU on the field seems very far away right now from the Georgias and Alabamas, and you can throw in Texas. Now, they beat Ole Miss just 3 weeks ago, so it's hard to say they're that far away, although I think we all recognize that they were somewhat fortunate in the big moments to beat Ole Miss. How do they get back, and how far away are they really? They're not as far away as they looked Saturday night, but I don't know that they're as close as they looked against Ole Miss either, and I don't think Ole Miss is the school LSU wants to compare itself to. So if the Tigers are sort of expected to compete for national titles, how far away are they from that spot?
Probably not that far away, but it's just going to take time. In terms of a level or time, it's just going to take time. And I think Kirk Herbstreit said this during the broadcast. They've got to recruit their way out of the situation they're in. They don't have enough talent in a lot of places. Certainly, you certainly see it on defense. This is not the defensive talent. You look at the secondary. You don't see Grant Delpit and Derek Stingley and players like that back there from a few years ago, or Patrick Peterson and Tyrann Mathieu. You don't see that, and it's not their fault. You just that's the players they have, and look, the whole thing. You can certainly lay this on Brian Kelly's feet as well. He brought in a defensive staff, and had a recruiting coordinator in Brian Polian, who was out of touch and out of step, and they tried to recruit nationally and not realizing that to be successful at LSU traditionally just has to recruit from East Texas to the Florida Panhandle, and you occasionally go far afield for a Bryce Underwood if you can get him, but you don't have to do that to be successful. And the whole thing didn't work out, and he had to revamp the whole defensive staff, and that's set them back, and that's taken more time. And I think they're showing signs of getting there. They've got what is right now the number 3 ranked recruiting class in the country. If they hold that together, and of course that's always very iffy these days in the days of NIL and things that you hold it all together. But based on what they have today, they've got a national contending kind of class. But you're going to need probably another one next year, and it's going to take a little time. That's the bad part of falling out of playoff contention this year right now. It's like you look at next year, and you're like, oh, you're losing most of your offensive line. You're losing some key players. Will Garrett Nussmeier go pro or not? I think he shouldn't. But, it's certainly a possibility that he will. And then so you'd have a very tough time competing, for anything next year. So you're looking at 2026, and that's really – that's 2 years away, but that also seems like a very long time.
It's also Brian Kelly's 5th year at that point.
Right, exactly. So, but maybe that is the focus you have right now. Maybe it's there's been a lot of talk in politics about Project 2025. Maybe for LSU it's Project 2026. That's got to be the goal of 2 years from now being a contending program, because you're not that right now.
I thought, Rab, you had a good point in your pregame column. You said how Brian Kelly has spent the last 3 years kind of playing whack-a-mole. Right? First year was the special teams. That was a disaster. And then last year was the defense. The offense was as good as it possibly could have been, but the defense was far behind. So you address the defensive staff. But then, this year it's the offense that isn't as good as it was. And then the defense probably still isn't giving you much. I'm just looking at the defense and what it's looked like the last 6 quarters. Zach, I just think and you can correct me on this if I'm wrong, I just think the defense looked like it did last year for the last 6 quarters of football. It's like you looked almost helpless. Like you expected Alabama and Texas A&M to score every time they had the ball. And that's something that
it looked like on third down. It's 3rd and 6, or whatever Alabama had. They're gonna make it. You just felt like, and they did to start the game. You couldn't stop with third down conversion.
And it's just like it's that feeling of helplessness that you had last year. So. What went wrong with the running quarterbacks? I'm not sure I can say definitively, but there were a lot of times I think where LSU didn't have the gap integrity that Brian Kelly has been looking for all season. It felt like they were out of position sometimes. It felt like Jalen Milroe's rushing lanes were just way too wide open, and guys were taking poor angles, both at the second level and at the third level of the defense, and they couldn't create any pressure when Milroe did drop back to pass. They couldn't keep him contained in the pocket. They let him scramble, get outside, and that's 6 quarters now where they couldn't do it against Marcel Reed, and then they had 2 weeks to prepare for Jalen Milroe, and this is the result. So is that personnel, is that talent, or is that coaching? It's probably a little of both. It's probably not the binary, but the investments you made on the defensive staff. I don't think they showed up against Alabama in these last 6 quarters because everyone sort of felt like they were out of sync.
Yeah, I think you need to see, instead of the whack-a-mole, I think what LSU fans want to see and where this program needs to go is just sort of some steady improvement. And it's never going to work. There's always 2 steps forward, 1 step back in sports. That's the way they go. But I think they'd like to see more of that consistency, especially against the top teams over the next year and a half or so, until maybe they are ready to compete.
Yeah, and it's difficult in college sports because of the transfer portal now and everything. And okay, we built it. It's different from like the Saints trying to rebuild and get to be a contender again. Well, you can sign players to contracts for, and you figure you're going to have them for the next X number of years. Well, in college they leave. They're gone after 3 years or 4 years or 5 years, and it's sometimes it's difficult to, once you get something in place. Then like this offensive line, they're supposed to be so great. Well, Campbell and Jones are going to leave, and some other players might leave, and it's just then you got to kind of start over again in a sense, or because you might not have the depth. They're not playing a lot of players who are backups right now, so I don't know if they're getting the experience. But it's a constantly moving target in college sports. But you can get there, you can be there, and LSU has the means to do it. I think they're competitive enough in the NIL game. They've got the facilities. They've got the talent base they're sitting on. It's not like Nebraska trying to regain past glories. There's just not a lot of talent in the state of Nebraska.
Right.
You're having to go into other states to try to get players. You're the dominant program in your state as far as FBS programs go. So it's the means are there, and the expectation is reasonable for LSU to get there. But it's I had somebody tweeted at me during the game. LSU is just a mid-level SEC program now. I said, well, you're playing the only program in the country that has won more national championships than you this century. Okay, so I would say I don't think they're a mid-level program, but it's a more crowded house now with Texas and Oklahoma joining the league, and it's tougher, and it's going to be tough to do that on a consistent basis, not just for LSU but for everybody, because there's just so many programs that have invested so much into football.
And look, you talk about the transfer portal, and obviously players leaving by more traditional means of the draft or graduation or whatever, and that is definitely a factor. But if you are the type of program that LSU aspires to be, if you're Alabama, if you're Georgia, if you're Texas, those drop-offs shouldn't happen as often or as dramatically, right? Because you should be the one who's able to attract more talent. And LSU's doing that. Like, they've got the recruiting class to do it. So I don't think all hope is lost or anything, but it is kind of a sobering time to look at it and say, well, how far away are they? And with that said, we're going to kind of close the book on this Alabama game by looking back at our Keys to the Game. And our Keys to the Game segment is proudly sponsored by Associated Grocers. Join our team and support the success of local independent retail grocers. Apply today for available positions at Associated Grocers. And our keys to the game were basically run the ball, stop the running quarterback, things LSU did not do. They did have the big run from Caden Durham on their first offensive drive that put them in scoring position, but then they couldn't run the ball down by the goal line, and they really couldn't run the ball the rest of the night. And obviously, Reed, you talked about the disaster that defending Jalen Milroe was. I mean, he had 12 carries, and I think one of those might have been a sack, right? So it was really only 11 carries, and 4 of them were touchdowns. Like, that's not a good ratio.
No, it's not. And if you look back at the last 2 games Jalen Milroe has played against LSU, his numbers, I don't remember the exact numbers, but it's something like 20-something carries for 350 yards or so and 8 touchdowns. It's just like the last 2 years against LSU, he really just ran wild, and LSU let get him loose. I think it's going to be interesting to see what Brian Kelly says today in his Monday press conference, where we're taping this Monday morning. Before that, I just curious to know what he thinks just went wrong defensively now that he's had a day or two to digest it. Why were guys missing assignments? Were they in the wrong gaps? Were they taking poor angles on him? Were they not getting enough penetration to the backfield? Or were they not? Were they just getting blown up by the Alabama offensive line? I don't know for sure. It's probably a combination of all those factors, but it just goes to show how this defense it looked just like this last year. They couldn't. The rushing lanes for Jalen Milroe on Saturday were wide. Oh, they were so wide. They were so big and wide, and he got whatever he wanted, and that's how Alabama won. From the start, he had that long touchdown run. I believe it was 40 yards or so, and then at the end he had the 70-yarder. So that's it. Those 2 runs kind of bookended a just overall disastrous performance for LSU.
And on the other side of the ball, this offensive line, we talked all year about how it's been great in pass protection, but hasn't been able to clear holes in the running game as much as you would have thought. Now the pass pro maybe has taken a step back. Alabama only had 2 sacks, but felt like Garrett Nussmeier didn't have as much time as he would have liked. Part of that is game state when you're behind. But this offensive line just has not been what we thought it was going to be. It has not been this elite strength for LSU.
No, it's been a disappointment. It's been probably the biggest disappointment on the whole team, and because now so much was expected of them, but when Durham took off on that 45-yard run, a nice stretch run play, which I think everybody agrees they probably should go to a little more, 45 yards down to the 5. I was thinking, I don't know about you, Reed, but I was thinking, they might not punch this in. It's too bad for LSU. He couldn't make it all the way. That he got tracked down by the defensive back, and sure enough, they get stuffed on the run, a couple of incompletions, and they kick a field goal, which is in and of itself is not bad. You're only down 7-3. You've answered Alabama's early touchdown by Milroe, but it certainly set a tone, and it's a tone that's been familiar. The rest of the game, including the time or two that Nussmeier got sacked, they only averaged 2.6 yards per carry on the rest of their carries per game. That's not going to get it done. Alabama rushed for over 300 yards in the game, but you're not going to lose when you have something like that. So it's been bad. And I know they were missing Garrett Dellinger, and he's a key piece, but he's a guard and not an All-American guard. They're not picking on him, but I'm just saying he's not an All-American like Will Campbell's.
The run game wasn't working before he.
Yeah, it wasn't, and that shouldn't bring down the whole house of cards. It just not having Garrett Dellinger, but the play where Nussmeier, got sacked and fumbled. The linebacker came through untouched through the gap between the center and the right guard. DJ Chester wasn't even looking. They had 3 guys trying to block one guy to the left, and the guy comes to the right of Chester untouched, and Nussmeier, I mean, obviously he could have held onto the ball, but he was a dead duck. I mean, he had no chance to get away from the guy, and that's been and I think you're starting to see, Reed. I think he's starting to throw off his back foot more. I think he's really worried about the protection now too. We've been saying, they're really good at pass protection, they're bad at run blocking. I think he's starting to worry about the hits he's taking too, which accumulate over the course of a season. So it's a bad situation for LSU, and in that regard, it's not terrible, it's not unfixable, but it's just trending in a very bad direction right now.
And you can't rely on them to run the ball. I think at this point we can say that they're just not a good rushing team. They're not a good rushing offense. We've been waiting for it to show up and get better, and it looked good against Arkansas, so that sort of gave you hope that it could look good against A&M and Alabama, but it just hasn't shown up.
Where's Caleb Jackson? He's disappeared.
Yeah, it's the biggest mystery for me this season is how has LSU not been able to run the ball as well as we thought it could. The offensive line, we know how much there's talent, how much talent there is on that line. We know, how good they've been in pass protection, I guess up until the Alabama game. Why haven't they been able to run the ball? I think it's a big mystery, and I think it's a huge reason why this season sort of spiraled out of control.
Yeah, two things I'll mention. I think both of your star tackles, Emory Jones and Will Campbell, both got called for key holding penalties. Am I right in thinking that, or
yes,
maybe one?
You did.
Yeah, and then on the other side, Alabama, which one of the things that the Crimson Tide's offense has struggled with so much is third downs, especially on 3rd and longs. I mean, their numbers, I don't have them in front of me, but they were terrible on 3rd and long. They converted 4 out of 5 on either 3rd and 8 or 3rd and 9 in this game. You just couldn't get them off the field. And
it's very 2023-ish to Reed's point.
If we're giving report cards out, I think it's F's all around.
By the way, Milroe last 2 games against LSU, 32 carries, 340 yards, 8 touchdowns. And over LSU's last 2 games, if you include the A&M game and Marcel Reed, quarterbacks, so just the quarterbacks, 21 carries, 247 yards, and 7 touchdowns.
It's like high school football numbers with bad teams.
Something went wrong there. Something just went horribly wrong. It's one of, I think when you look at it big picture, LSU's inability to run the ball on offense and stop the run, especially the quarterback run on defense. Those are the 2 main reasons why this season is sort of out of control now.
Yep. All right. So not good on the keys to the game. What is good is Associated Grocers is hiring. Join a team committed to the success of independent retail grocers. Apply today at Associated Grocers and be part of something great. Real quick on the injury report, that's probably the one piece of good news. LSU, I don't think, picked up any new injuries that we know of on Saturday night. You mentioned Garrett Dellinger. He may be back. I guess Brian Kelly originally said the Florida game was the earliest he could be back from this kind of minor heel surgery he had. I'm going to guess it's probably still another week, but we'll find out. You'll get an update today.
High ankle sprain. He had the tightrope surgery.
Ankle, not heel.
Yeah, it's a tough injury. Not sure when he's going to be back. Brian Kelly said he could be potentially back at Florida, but we'll find out more today.
The injury report is brought to you by the Baton Rouge Clinic, and today's show is brought to you by the Baton Rouge Clinic, your trusted healthcare provider in the heart of Baton Rouge. Whether you're in need of primary care, specialist services, or urgent care, the Baton Rouge Clinic has you covered with a team of dedicated and experienced professionals. Visit BatonRougeClinic.com to learn more or to schedule your appointment today. The Baton Rouge Clinic, caring for generations. And with that said, we're going to take our last break and got a few more segments to get through after this, go around the SEC and talk a little bit of basketball to wrap up the show. We'll be back right after this.
Since 1988, Classic Industrial Services, Inc. has led the industry in specialty contracting. From thermal insulation to scaffolding, coatings, and beyond, we cover it all. Every minute matters in our commitment to quality and safety. We're here to serve with roofing, siding, heat trace, and refractory services. Visit ClassicIndustrial.com for more information.
Welcome back. Wrapping things up with a few of our segments here as we pull the lens back. We're going to have a full preview of the LSU Florida game in Thursday's podcast. And I'm not trying to say that no game is important anymore, because I still think 9-3 is better than 8-4, and 8-4 is better than 7-5. I mean, there's still you only get 12 of these games every year, so you try to win all of them that you can. And clearly LSU doesn't want to let the season get completely off the rails, Well, let's just talk about this. The Queen of Baton Rouge proudly sponsors the LSU Sports Insiders sports betting segment. Experience the thrill of game day at 1717 Kitchen and Cocktails, your premier destination for elevated sports entertainment. And what I was going to say is, if you look at DraftKings, there's odds for a team to make the playoffs. And after Saturday's result, this is definitely a to the winner go the spoils sort of thing. But Alabama is now, what are they? minus 400 to make the playoffs, so a heavy favorite now. And Alabama's still, who do they have left next week? I know they play Auburn to end the year, and they Mercer or somebody. It's Oklahoma. They play Oklahoma. So as long as they beat Oklahoma and Auburn, they're going to be it. So that's they're minus 400. That means you'd have to lay $400 just to win $100. On the other side, LSU's plus 700, 7-1. That seems too low. It's got to be higher than that. Like, what's LSU's path to the playoff here, guys? What would you be betting into at 7-1?
I don't see a path, Rab. I don't think there is one.
You could win some crazy 6-way tiebreaker and get into the SEC championship game. That would be the way.
Yeah, the path is they could make the championship game. They still are not. There are 2 losses. There's 3 one-loss teams: Texas A&M, and Tennessee in conference play.
And Texas and Texas A&M play each other. So
yeah, so LSU is in that mix in that way. So they could get to the championship game and win and get an automatic bid to the playoff. But that's a very narrow.
It's more
path.
than 7-1. That's like 7-1.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I agree.
Yeah. So I don't.
We're advising y'all not to.
I would not bet that. I don't necessarily understand that. I think if you want to bet the other way to say they won't make the playoffs, it's like minus 1,400 or something. You're not going to make a lot of money on that. But it's a weird situation, because technically there's still like this tiny little sliver of a chance. And so again, do you want to beat Florida? Yes, you want to beat Florida. Do you want to beat Vanderbilt and Oklahoma? Yes. You get to 9-3, you get to 6-2 in the SEC, and then you let the chips fall where they may.
Save your money, buy some lunch instead.
That's right. Yeah, that's right.
Good advice.
It's more expensive than ever. Tiger fans, you can catch all the sports action at the Queen Casino's DraftKings Sportsbook Bar and 1717 Kitchen and Cocktails with top-notch screens and live betting. It's the ultimate spot to watch your favorite teams and enjoy a cold brew or a signature cocktail. The Queen Casino is the only land-based casino in Baton Rouge and your go-to for game day or any day. Visit today and elevate your sports watching experience. And on those notes, guys, we're going to go around the SEC with Classic Industrial Services. At Classic Industrial Services, every minute matters. And you talked about this, Rab. 3 teams with 1 loss Texas and Texas A&M, who have the game Thanksgiving weekend.
In College Station.
Yeah, one of them will end up with 2 losses at least. And then Tennessee, who this week has to play Georgia. And, as we go around the SEC, Georgia's loss to Ole Miss was the other sort of seismic result in the league this weekend. Could Georgia get in with 3 losses? They would be to Alabama, Ole Miss, and let's say Tennessee, 3 possible playoff teams. They would have a win over Texas. They would have a win over Clemson. It would certainly be a strong 3-loss resume. Do you think it's possible?
I definitely think it's possible for a team like that. I've been saying that, and somebody like Heather Dinich, ESPN's college football playoff expert, said that she thinks a 3-loss team can get in. I don't think they're number 11 in the AP poll this week. It's going to be interesting to see where they are when the rankings come out. The CFP rankings come out on Tuesday night. But I bet they're still going to be in the top 10 because of what you said. The strength of schedule will certainly factors very heavily in their favor. And obviously, if they beat Tennessee, they're in good shape. I think they're a strong favorite to get in. Though that game with Georgia Tech looms like it's certainly not a given after Georgia Tech.
Now that's a game you couldn't lose, though.
Yeah. After they just beat Miami, but the SEC bigger picture though, Zach, the SEC does appear to be kind of cannibalizing itself at this point in the season. Only one team in the top 5. That's Texas. 4 of the top 5 teams are from the Big Ten for the first time ever in the AP poll. The SEC, there's some other SEC teams down, in 6 to 11, Alabama, Ole Miss, Georgia, but Tennessee is up there. But it's a little bit of knocking each other around pretty good, and like the Georgia Tennessee loser is going to be in that precarious spot too. After this week is the biggest game in the conference, biggest game in the country probably, and so we'll see if. What happens there, but the SEC is kind of beating itself up at this point, as you'd expect with the teams. It's not one great team; there's a bunch of very good teams, and I think that's what you got.
Yeah, there's like 4 or 5 of them. I think that can theoretically win the national championship, right? I mean, if you look at it, things break right. You get to the SEC title game, maybe you win the SEC title game, then you got that first round bye, and that's going to be huge with your chances. How many SEC teams are in play for that? It's a good handful right now. So I think if you look at Georgia, losing to Ole Miss hurts for sure, but it absolutely wasn't a death knell for them. I think they still have a path. But if they lose to Tennessee this week, then they sort of leave it up more to chance, give more power to the committee to sort of decide where they are and what they want to do. And of course, if they lose, then they're probably not going to be in the SEC title game, which means they have a tougher path to the national title game, right? So Georgia, you can lose that game, I think, against Tennessee and still be technically alive, but the path to accomplishing what you want to accomplish as Georgia, as who you are and what you want to accomplish as a program gets so much tougher if you lose this weekend.
I've been saying this since the summertime. Georgia's schedule was so difficult. You could see them losing a couple of games and ending up as like the 9 or the 10 seed. Still getting into the playoff, and who would hate that is the 1 or the 2 seed. Imagine being Oregon or Ohio State and say, "Oh, we had a great season. We're the number 2 seed nationally," and look at the 10 seed in our bracket. It's freaking Georgia.
Yeah.
and then you have to play your first playoff game, a quarterfinal game that's like a national championship caliber opponent. Now Georgia's not as good as they've been the last couple of years. I think that's part of this too. But on the right day. We saw what they did to Texas. We saw what they did to Clemson, just dominating a good team in Clemson. Like that is a scary team on the right day.
Who's the scariest team in the SEC right now?
It's got to be Texas, right? I mean, Texas is still the most consistent.
I think you can make the argument. You can make the argument for Alabama.
In terms of scariest, I would probably say Alabama, just because of the quarterback, right, and Jalen Milroe, and how if you let him get loose, then he can take over a game. I don't think Georgia has that kind of player on offense to do that. So I think in terms of just fear, I think it's Alabama. If they get rolling, then they can really be something.
That's a good point. I mean, we've been talking about this from the LSU side. From the Alabama side, they've played 2 top 25 teams the last 2 weeks last 2 games and outscored them 76-13. Yeah. This is a far cry from what they were a month ago.
Alabama, they're the only team in the country with 4 wins over AP top 25 ranked teams. No other team has more than 2.
So let's look at this real quick from a CFP perspective. I think the 4 Big Ten teams that are in the top 5 are almost certain to get in, barring some huge upset, which could happen. But Ohio State, Oregon, Penn State, and Indiana.
I don't think Ohio State gets in if they lose to Indiana. I don't.
Maybe not. A two-loss Ohio State, you don't think?
If they're not in the Big Ten championship game, I don't
but
think we get in.
for now, that game's at Ohio State, correct? So we'll say that would be a significant upset for Indiana to win that.
Oh,
no
doubt.
We'll say those 4 teams get in: Ohio State, Oregon, Indiana, Penn State. Then you have a group of 5 champion, like Boise State, maybe. Big 12 is an odd situation because if BYU remains undefeated but then were to lose the Big 12 championship game, could they get 2 teams in? It's possible.
Who would that other team be?
Well, whoever beat them in the Big 12, Colorado, Kansas State, whoever would beat them in the Big 12 championship game would BYU then get in at 12-1.
Would their resume be strong enough? Would they have enough enough quality wins to get in over some of these SEC teams?
Similar discussion in the ACC, where now Miami has a loss. Clemson's now lost twice.
Yeah.
And Pitt has now lost twice. And
SMU
I believe, leads the conference.
Yeah, they're the best
so
record.
to me, the ACC seems likely you're just getting 1 team. Whoever loses that championship game is probably not getting in, unless there's some weird tiebreaker where an 11-1 team gets left out, maybe. But I think the ACC is a one bid league. The Big 12, depending on how things break down, but it's getting to the point where you could at least see a pathway. If you have 4 Big 10 teams, a group of 5, an ACC, and just 1 Big 12, there is a path to where 5 SEC teams could get in.
Oh, yeah.
And at this point, what's the pecking order for those? Texas, I guess Tennessee, since they only have 1 loss right now. Then I would say Georgia's your top 2-loss team, given the strength of schedule that we talked about, especially if they remain with 2 losses. Alabama. And then the 5th team, is it A&M? Is it Ole Miss?
I'd say Ole Miss right now.
Could somebody win a crazy tiebreaker and steal the automatic bid like an LSU, or Missouri's the other team with 2 losses? Those are further down the probability, but that's the picture right now.
I will say this. I think it's going to become very apparent that somebody's going to be very happy to be the 3rd place team in their conference and not risk losing the conference championship game and getting knocked out.
Yeah.
And they're going to get in. They're going to have to maybe go on the road for a first-round game, but they're still going to get in. And then if you win that game and you move on to the quarterfinals, then you see what happens. But I think somebody's going to be very happy to say, we're number 3, yes.
Yeah, absolutely. That's the new conversation. That's the expanded playoff. I think A&M. You might have had A&M a little too low there. They did lose at South Carolina, but I think what if they beat Texas?
If they beat Texas, they zoom up.
That game's at home.
No doubt about
at home for them. So I think that's absolutely in the realm of possibility.
Now, if they lose to Texas, that's your 3rd loss. They're all pretty good losses, but I just don't think you get in at that point.
So do you feel the way about the college football playoff that you thought you would going into the season with 3 or 4 weeks to go?
I will say this. It's been a weird year to have the 12-team playoff.
Because there's no great team.
Yeah, there's no great teams out there. You have a distinct possibility of a 9-3 team getting in. I will say this. I think SEC teams on the bubble and everything, you ought to root for BYU to just run the table at this point. Or to lose a couple before they would get to the Big 12 championship, because that Big 12 second spot could end up taking a spot away from the SEC. That'll be the big. My prediction is that'll be the big argument on December the 1st? No, December the 8th. It'd be the next Sunday. Yeah. Next Sunday, December the 8th. That's going to be the big argument: is 2nd Big 12 team or 5th SEC team. That's my prediction. So
it's created this whole new level of interest. That's the point I was getting at. It has created this whole new level of interest and kept a lot more teams in it. When you're still giving the odds for LSU at this point, it's like everybody's giving up hope, and it's like, well, there's not much hope, but technically there is.
Hope is a powerful drug, man. I don't. Maybe they beat Florida and beat Vanderbilt, and there's some upsets elsewhere, and we're going into November 30th saying, hey, if this, and this happened, you just never know. So today's episode of the LSU Sports Insider is brought to you by Classic Industrial Services, proudly serving Louisiana and the entire United States with metal siding and roofing, steam and electric tracing systems, industrial and commercial coatings, and much more. From large capital projects to commercial projects or your smaller quick response needs, Classic Industrial is your go-to for quality and safety. But they're not just about business, they're a proud community partner, supporting local initiatives and helping build a stronger Baton Rouge. Because at Classic Industrial Services, every minute matters. All right, last thing, guys, to just talk a couple minutes of basketball. Both LSU basketball teams are 2-0. The women, Reed, play. You're the primary beat writer for the LSU women's team. They play tomorrow morning at 11 a.m. Is that
field trip game? Annual field trip game.
Sounds like a Beatles concert.
Shrieking children that we'll have to listen to.
Yes.
11 a.m. sharp.
I'll bring you some earplugs.
You sound like you're looking forward to it.
Hey, we got some news here. LSU women are number 7 in the AP poll. They stayed where they were in the preseason. But interestingly, Stanford is now 24. So LSU, if Stanford can stay in the top 25, then that's another ring.
Yeah, they had a nice win.
Yeah, they did. They blew out. God, I'm forgetting who it is. But yeah, they moved into the top 25. So yeah, that's. If they stay there, then that's a ranked non-conference game for LSU.
Because as you would have guessed, Stanford comes here to play LSU as part of the SEC ACC Challenge because Stanford, of course, is one of your traditional dyed-in-the-wool ACC teams.
Very natural.
Atlantic Coast
Tobacco Road
Conference. Stanford is on the Atlantic Coast. I mean, that's what can you say?
Did they grow tobacco in Contra Costa, California?
They grow some things.
Yeah, this is the wacky tobacco. On that note, today's Star Player segment is proudly sponsored by Waste Pro. Ensure your tailgate or event is a hit with clean and convenient portable toilets from Waste Pro. Rent yours today. And the Lady Tigers have faced two very overmatched opponents, Reed.
Yes.
But Flau'jae Johnson so far living up to the hype. 25 points in one game, 24 in the other. She's shooting like 20 of 31, almost 67% from the field. I mean, like this is exactly what you wanted to see from
and
her.
50% from 3 too. I mean, she's been phenomenal. I think Kim Mulkey has used a lot of different words to describe her. She's almost said she's looked effortless. You know, she looks super comfortable out there. I mean,
she's in the best shape of her career.
The best shape of her life. You know, she looks phenomenal, and she really picked up where she left off in the NCAA tournament. You could make a case she was LSU's best player last season in the NCAA tournament, and she really carried that over into this year. I mean, she was awesome in the exhibitions. She's been awesome through 2 games. Again, like you mentioned, completely overmatched opponents. What'd you call them? Blood drive games? Is that what you call them? Blood donor games. Yeah.
Nice.
So, but she's been LSU's best player. She looks fantastic. I mean, super comfortable, efficient, everything you could have hoped to see through 2 games.
Obviously, Angel Reese was a great player and a 2-time All-American and well-deserved, but she rebounded so well, but she missed so many shots. You know, how many of her rebounds came because it was a third time she's putting the ball back up there to try. It wasn't the most beautiful thing to watch. Flau'jae Johnson is a stylish player to watch. She can drive to the basket. She can Euro step. She can hit the jumpers. She can get in the passing lanes with her long arms and just when she's running the court, it is just breathtaking to watch. I'm not picking on Angel Reese. She's a great player. Might be a Hall of Famer one day. But I think Flau'jae is it's what I like to see in basketball. I guess you'd like to say that her style of play.
It's more aesthetic for sure.
The game is a little more aesthetically pleasing. But if you like the dirty work, then you like Angel Reese's game. I think it's hard, Zach, to glean something from these games that they're winning by 60+ points. But I think one clear takeaway you have is that Flau'jae is one of the best players in the country, I think, and the star power that LSU has between her and Nisa Morrow and Michaela Williams, it's enough to get them into these conversations of national title contenders.
Yep. And on the men's side, our star players, Cam Carter, transfer from K-State. He's a Donaldsonville native. Scored 18 of his 21 points in the second half against Alabama State yesterday. 4 of 5 from three-point range. Jordan Sears, who's a Tennessee Martin transfer, also had 18 points in the second half of that game. This is like Alabama State was. I was checking the score after the Saints game yesterday. Alabama State had a 10-point lead with like 12 minutes to go in this game. When you talk about these blood donor games, you're not going to build an NCAA tournament resume on these wins, but you can't lose one because then you got a giant hole in that resume. And so it's important for LSU. And they ended up winning fairly comfortably. I think they won by 13 or 14 points. Like turned it around a lot in those last 12 minutes, but that's sort of the first backs against the wall moment for the Tigers, and they came through.
Yeah, it's not as much as expected of the men as the women. Obviously, they were picked 14th in the SEC at media days, but yeah, you can't lose those games. I think people are probably is that a warning light? Yeah. We'll see how good Alabama State is in the SWAC. Maybe they're going to be really good. They look pretty good against LSU, so maybe they're going to be really good. But you're right. You can't lose one. Show some character. You can look at it two ways. You shouldn't have gotten that far behind, but it shows some character to come back from the game. And they've got some interesting pieces. They've got height. They've got depth. They've got guards. They've got a lot of what you want the kinds of things you want to have a good team. Are they going to be talented enough in a obviously? Here's a new one. The SEC is really tough in a sport.
Really good.
So are they going to be good enough to compete and to get an NCAA tournament bid for the first time since the end of the Will Wade era? That remains to be seen. But I think you can look for now. You can look at the positive and say they showed the moxie to come back as compared to losing the second game of the season to Nicholls State last year, where everybody thought, oh, they're not going anywhere, and they made it to the NIT.
And real quick on Cam Carter, McMahon talked about how he wants to see him become more efficient and shoot it more efficiently, both from the field and from three-point range. So far, he's made 8 of his 13 three-pointers. Like I said, only 2 games, but he's off to a really good start, really hot start, and he's shooting, I think, over 50% from the floor. So he's playing really well, and he's part of the reason that LSU came back and beat Alabama State yesterday.
And men's next game is on Thursday night against Cam Carter's old school in Kansas State. So the first time the LSU men kind of step up and play that Power 4 competition, or Power 5, I guess, in basketball, if you count the Big East, Power 5 level of competition. So we'll be keeping an eye on that on Thursday, as well as obviously a full preview of LSU Florida in football, and be back with you then. So subscribe to our LSU Sports at NOLA.com YouTube channel. Got a lot of good videos up from this weekend's events around the game. Those are fun. The game itself wasn't so fun as we described today. But subscribe to the channel, hit the like button while you're there, and tell your friends about us. For our producer, Alex Lee, he's Reed Darcey, he's Scott Rabalais, I'm Zach Ewing, and we'll see you next time on the LSU Sports Insider.